If you're new to the channel, you might not know about my love for Half-Life Alyx. If that's the case, I'll let you in on a little secret. I love Half-Life Alyx. I know, shocker. I decided to make this video because I have a confession. I'm not quite sure how to say it without hurting Alyx's feelings, so I'm just gonna spit it out. Alyx, you weren't my first. Boneworks was, and honestly, sometimes I think about him when I'm with you. Whew, wow, it feels good to get that off my chest. You know, now that that's out in the open, maybe Alyx will forgive me. I mean, it's my favorite VR game by a wide margin, and I spent plenty of time with it over the last year or so. I'm sure it knows that I love it, that it's the only one for me that Yeah, I feel dirty saying it out loud, but before Half-Life Alyx came around, another game took up a sizable chunk of real estate in my mind day in and day out. Boneworks came out my senior year at university, and if there's one thing every current senior or alumni knows, it's that senioritis can be a real bitch. When Boneworks dropped on December 10th back in 2019, I was nearing the final days of my collegiate career. I graduated a semester early, meaning I'd be going home for good in less than 2 weeks. Little did I know the Rona was going to make sure I stayed home, but at the time, nothing like the inconvenience of pandemic life was there to occupy my mind or distract me from the game I rushed back home from class to play every day. My housemates and I were all busy with final projects and papers up until winter break, but I didn't let anything as pointless as education get between me and a new VR game. And boy, was I glad I neglected the last bit of schoolwork I'll hopefully ever have to do. 'Cause sister, let me tell you, Boneworks was a much needed shock to my VR brain, and changed how I saw the medium to this day. Up until the point I launched Boneworks and played a solid 5 to 6 hours straight, I had put most of the time spent in my headset into titles like Skyrim VR or Beat Saber. Both of those games were great, and remained solid titles to this day. One of them offered an enormous familiar world, tweaked and reworked to be playable in VR, and the other was a fun rhythm game, aping experiences like Rock Band or Guitar Hero. The problem with them, much like the problem with other games I played up until the point I launched Boneworks for the first time, like Blade and Sorcery, Onward, and Pavlov, was that they always felt like pre-existing experiences. I've played dozens of shooters throughout my life, and while adapting them into the new and exciting medium that was VR caught my interest, titles like Pavlov and Onward did little more than add a new dimension to the same game modes and minigames I had played a decade before. Ports of existing games into VR like Skyrim, Fallout 4, Subnautica, and many more games can be great, and their existence and whether or not it's warranted is a topic for another video. But this isn't about ports of existing games. It's about a game that showed me and plenty of other gamers with VR headsets what the platform is truly capable of. In many ways, Boneworks laid the foundation for other games like it to come, breaking new ground and tilling the soil for new platform-defining experiences to crop up as time goes by. I'd be a fool to say Half-Life Alyx took its gameplay or level design from Boneworks, or that it was even inspired by any of the game design, but who's to say that Valve didn't take a few notes from the response to Boneworks' release, and ensure that they went through one last wave of optimizations and bug fixes. When I say Boneworks paved the way for Half-Life Alyx, I'm not claiming that it inspired the developers, the team over at Campo Santo, to make any serious changes to Alyx. By the time Boneworks released mid-December of 2019, Half-Life Alyx had already been announced for a month. Valve doesn't announce games until they're practically ready to ship out to consumers. What I am saying is that Boneworks buttered up a serious chunk of VR gamers, preparing them for the eventual release of Alyx. Don't get me wrong, Valve did an excellent job at offering different types of control schemes and comfort options to existing and new VR players, which can easily suffice as a person's introduction to VR. But Boneworks helped plenty of existing VR owners comprehend what the platform is truly capable of. Boneworks' shtick is this: everything you come across as you journey through the various levels created by Stress Level 0 is based in a realistic physical reality. That means each crate you smash to bits actually smashes into real tangible bits that you can interact with and even take with you on your journey if you are so inclined. Melee weapons follow a set of rules based on realistic physics-based interactions, and your virtual body adheres to similar physics. While it could be argued that games like Blade and Sorcery were the first to offer physical interactions like the ones found in Boneworks, no other title offered a complete picture like the one presented by Boneworks. In fact, it took Blade and Sorcery until a few weeks ago to enable self-collision, something Boneworks had from the get-go. I have to give credit to Boneworks for many things in this video, but there is one nitpick I should address before I continue. Back when I purchased the game, it brought my poor Ryzen 5 1600 to its knees. I swear, after long sessions in the game, I could hear my PC crying out for mercy. Even with settings lowered, I found myself facing a slideshow as I entered a demanding section of the game. This was mostly due to my weak CPU, something that was remedied a year later when I bought a Ryzen 5 3600. It was a good thing I had already found my VR legs by the time I got to this game, because the combination of occasional poor frame rates and the game's tendency to fling anything and everything, including your body, high into the air willy-nilly is enough to bring the uninitiated to their knees. Fortunately, due to a few timely purchases and a seriously sweet hookup from a friend, I now find myself playing this game with smooth frame rates, and graphics cranked all the way up. If Half-Life Alyx hadn't released a few months later, Boneworks would probably still take the crown as the most impressive and immersive VR title I've played. Alyx ended up passing Boneworks up with a much more technically impressive world, story, and level of polish that Boneworks probably couldn't have even tried to reach if the dev team had tried to reach it. In fact, to the uninformed, Boneworks feels really janky at times. Sometimes your arm gets caught in a doorway, or an object you lift handles like a bunch of bricks, but these interactions are not only to be expected if you understand what Boneworks is going for, they should be celebrated. No half measures were taken when handling the physics behind Boneworks' interactions. The perceived jankiness is really only an issue due to the limitations of the platform, not the game. An example of this can be found when you compare Half-Life Alyx to Boneworks. In Alyx, the only objects that can interact with the world are your hands. In fact, the only part of your body that you can see are your mitts, a decision that initially disappointed me when starting the game after becoming familiar with Boneworks in the months leading up to Alyx's release. Valve made this decision for a reason I both respect and somewhat support. While Half-Life games have historically pushed the boundaries of gaming at the time of their release, they've also been released with the minimum amount of jank possible. While it might be impressive to see the objects your virtual body interacts with move out of the way as you blaze a trail through Boneworks levels, it leads to a disconnect that simply wouldn't fit into the playstyle created by Valve. If we could feel every part of our body in VR like in Ready Player One, carrying a heavy crate and bracing it against our torso would feel natural. Unfortunately, as the tech behind VR currently stands, such interactions are either non-existent or incredibly expensive to poorly recreate. Where Half-Life Alyx introduced players to highly detailed environments, it did so at the cost of scale. Yes, Alyx uses scale effectively to establish the oppressive nature of the Citadel, or to subtly convey your progress through the game by bringing the vault closer and closer to the player as time passes, but it has to do so through clever technical tricks to allow the environment closer to you to be lavishly detailed. Boneworks managed to convey massive scale to me long before I launched Alyx, and did so with a touch reminiscent of Lord Todd's masterpiece.
All of this just works.
Boneworks might have had less detailed environments and less exciting buildings filling the horizon as I made my way through its city streets, but it did Valve the favor of teaching me to look beyond the world a few meters before me. The excellent work done to the skybox, one of the most impressive aspects of Source 2 and in turn Half-Life Alyx, might have gone unnoticed without Boneworks. In fact, the videos highlighting aspects of the game's development throughout the years leading to the release were part of the reason I started to seriously consider and appreciate the smaller, more subtle details put into VR games to up the immersion factor. The way firearms, and especially two-handed weapons, are handled by Boneworks is another way the game paved the way for Half-Life Alyx. I've already discussed the reasoning behind Valve sticking to single-handed weapons in Alyx in a previous video of mine, which I'll probably end up linking at the end of this video, but for now I'll address the aspects of the weapons that I ignored back then. One thing that I neglected to mention was how the weapons interact with the world. You can complete entire playthroughs of Boneworks without firing a single bullet, a practice that is actually encouraged by the developer's weapons offered to the player near the end of the game. Yeah, you could complete a melee-only playthrough with the various sharp and blunt objects offered to the player throughout the game, or you could expand your mind and take the road less traveled. In Boneworks, two-handed weapons are more than a vessel for little gunpowder-propelled bullets. They're lean, mean, smacking machines. Sure, you can pistol whip a bitch for getting all up in your grill, but that's a tired and frankly played out interaction. Instead, you could sweep the leg and walk away. Finally, one of the most influential steps Boneworks took to help prepare me, and I'm sure plenty of other gamers for Half-Life Alyx, can be found around blind corners or waiting behind boxes of watermelons and coffee mugs. I won't go so far as to say that Stress Level Zero's take on headcrabs is better or worse than Alyx's. In fact, if you were to swing by my Discord, you'd be pretty familiar with my propensity for shoving headcrabs everywhere I can, including the server emotes. But I will take a leap and say that Boneworks headcrabs saved me the heart attack I'm sure I would have suffered if my first interaction with the headcrab leaping on my face in VR had been this.
Ah! Headcrab! A headcrab's on your face!
Boneworks was nudged out of its spot as my favorite VR game of all time by Half-Life Alyx, but Alyx's existence does not make Boneworks any less impressive or entertaining. Each game offers a different experience to the player, and each game has different strengths. Just because Half-Life Alyx's strengths, when judged as a whole, outweigh Boneworks, it doesn't mean that I don't go back to Boneworks every once in a while for a different and almost equally valuable reason. And now it's time for the question of the week. Except I think this segment might turn into the questions of the week because more than one of the questions proposed over on my Discord server caught my eye. So let's get right into it. This week's first question is from Discord user Vibin' Out, who asked, "How are you today?" The response to that question is the same response you'd get from me any day this last year. The second question that made the cut comes from Patty Ballrealty, I don't know how to pronounce that. How long does it take to edit, script, and collect gameplay for each video? I've been trying to keep a consistent upload schedule for these last few months, uploading one video a week, and for the most part, I've been able to stick to this schedule and the actual work behind each video has been relatively consistent. From Friday night to anywhere from Monday morning the next week to midday Wednesday, I'll write the script for each video. Then the rest of the time, up until the second I upload the video to YouTube, is spent frantically getting footage and editing the vocals, gameplay footage, and whatever other slop I decide to chuck into these editing nightmares. And finally, I'd like to field an incredibly thought-provoking question from a gentleman that goes by the name Payne.